Welcome to the Steen NBA channel. My name is Steen, and today we're going to be giving out player grades for just about every Charlotte Hornets player that played for the team this season. Now, there was a Cleveland game that I didn't recap, but it was filler for both teams, so I'm just going to get right into the grades. I don't want to talk about that game. Before I get into that, I have to ask if you could like, comment, subscribe, just something so I can get an indicator of how many Charlotte Hornets fans there are. And yeah, maybe we can start a community, you know? All right, just going to get some G League style lower end players out of the way first, to which I'm going to be honest, before I even say their names, most of them are getting low grades for sure. All right, Teo Maladon and Frank Ntilikina are getting Fs. They just had a short run with the team this season, and like they just didn't provide much to the team. All that needs to be said, Fs. Same with Nathan Mensah. He came in and tried. He gave effort, and honestly, he shouldn't have even been in that position to be such a big part of the Hornets center rotation. He's more of a third stringer, break glass in case of emergency type of player, but yeah, not much positive that I can say about him. And the day that he was cut out of the rotation, that was a good day. I'm also going to give out an F to Amari Bailey because of his limited play and not being an NBA player. At this point in time, I don't really see a future for him with the team. I don't really see him becoming a rotation player. Ish Smith was another one of those players like Nathan Mensah that just shouldn't have had a big role on the team. Probably shouldn't have even had a role at all. Probably should have been retired. But yeah, he gave what he could, but it just wasn't enough. Both of his stops in Charlotte are F worthy. He's unplayable because he provides no defense and he's a very limited scorer. Next up is James Bouknight. I wish I wore the Bouknight jersey, just now realizing that, but yeah, the thing is, like, just because of that reason, and I'm going to go like a little bit of a backstory a bit, but like it is a tough call because I really don't want to give Bouknight an F. I remember when he was first drafted and I watched his college highlights and summer league games and I was hyped. I was really excited for him, but he didn't get to play much in his rookie season, despite being ready to contribute. Actually, when he got real deal minutes, he balled out for the team. Then in the second season, he was a turbulent player. Sometimes he was good, but I know like to start off the season, he was bad. But then like near the end, he was a pretty good player. Like it was like up and down until his third season, which was this season. He was exclusively a garbage time player and he got waived. Bouknight got opportunities to shine, but I believe that him not playing in his rookie year broke his confidence and like he was never able to recover. He was ready to play for sure, but maybe he wasn't as good or as poised as guys like Terry, Kelly, Cody, those types of guys that were taking up minutes at a similar position. I believe that rather than rotting on the bench, Bouknight should have been flipped for someone like Miles Turner because that 2021-2022 Hornets team didn't have a real center. I don't want to give Bouknight an F because he was mismanaged, but there's not another grade that I can give him, especially for this season when he didn't contribute, so he's going to have to get an F. Next is Bryce McGowens, a guy that was more of an object, more of a tool to push an agenda rather than an actual player. This guy was hyped up to be better than Bouknight because like I saw Hornets fans, they had like massive just hate for Bouknight. So Bryce McGowens was propped up in that rookie year. All I heard is that he's better than Bouknight, just for him to fall off in the second season, which was so funny to see it like blow up in their faces. But that just makes the team worse. So like I didn't really wish for it to happen. He got so much playing time this season and it was tough to watch. A whole bunch of nothing that happens when he had the basketball. Like that's what happens. Dribble, and then it's either like a brick mid-range shot. It's like he is a bucket getter that can't get buckets, at least in the NBA. That's what he was coming in as, but like he just can't score at an NBA level. he's not going to like pan out to be that type of guy that's probably going to be like a 14 point per game scorer. I don't see that for him. And if that happens, it's probably going to be inefficient and on a bad team. The best day was when he was cut out of the rotation when the trade deadline acquisitions came in. And yes, because of that, he's going to get an F, and I would not like to see him return to the team. Next up is JT Thor. His final game of the season was so fake, and it's not at all what should be expected from him. He'll come in and play some all right defense, but the problem is offense. He always finds himself wide open in the corner, to which he just doesn't make teams pay. And like the lack of spacing affects the team's offense as a whole, and just how much space guys like LaMelo, Brandon, and Miles have to operate. I'm going to have to give him an F, but out of all of these players, he was the closest to getting a D grade. Next up is Nick Smith Jr. Amazing 3-point shooter, but he needs to work on everything else in his game. I'll give him a C+ because the 3-point shooting was just so good that it could make up for some of his deficiencies. Maybe he gets his spot back in the rotation if he works on his playmaking, adds that to his game, something like that. That would be nice. Next up is Marquise Bolden. There's not much to say. He barely got any playing time, but when he played, he got worked by every center that he was matched up with. His defense was terrible, and the 3-point shooting that was rumored to be a part of his game, like, it just wasn't there. He's going to get an F grade. Next is Leaky Black. The defense is there. I already knew he was going to bring some defense. What I didn't expect for him was to be a solid 3-point shooter. Like, low attempts for sure, but he cashed in on a decent amount of them. I haven't talked about Cody Martin yet, but I've got to say, I'd rather see the Hornets invest in Leaky Black over Cody Martin for sure. Leaky couldn't play much, which stops me from giving him something like an A or an A-, but I'll give him a B+. Next is Aleksej Pokusevski. The Hornets kind of took a flyer on him to see what he was like, and yeah, I like his shot blocking ability and the ability to dribble the ball up the court, but his offense is very limited, especially when he's shooting mid-range jumpers. All right, 3-point shooter, the numbers probably don't say that, but I like him shooting threes more than mid-range shots because it seemed like those never went in. I'll give him a B-. Solid within the context of this season. Fun having him on the team for sure, but for a team that's trying to make the playoffs next season, he probably doesn't need to return, I'll say that. Next up, I'm going to talk about some players that the Hornets traded. First up is Terry Rozier. There's two ways to look at this actually. His individual numbers were really good for the Hornets, but despite that, one thing that I could never ignore about Rozier is that he and LaMelo don't fit. They both need the ball in their hands to be at their best, and he is unwilling to play off the ball and defer. Like, the idea of Terry can't be traded because he's a 20-point per game scorer was always so casual. I don't care. It means nothing if he doesn't fit with the star player of the team and enhance his game in some way. Like the 32-point per game stretch that LaMelo was on didn't happen with Rozier and wouldn't have going forward unless Terry opted to take a smaller role, maybe even coming off the bench. But no, he just couldn't come off the bench for the trash Charlotte Hornets. No way. Also, with his insistence on being the leader, he keeps the actual leader of the team, LaMelo, from growing, and him taking some of those clutch shots and learning how to lead. Like, that's some stuff that should have went to LaMelo that went to Terry in those first 3 or 4 years. LaMelo might not have the street ball moves that Terry has, but just looking at production, LaMelo is better at everything than Terry, like scoring, playmaking, passing. So when they're splitting possessions, every Terry possession just ends up being a wasted one because LaMelo could have done more with that possession at a higher level. Good season, good individual season for him, but he's a bad fit, especially defensively. So I'll meet somewhere in the middle with a B-. Next up is PJ Washington. I don't have much to say about the guy. He's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, but he's very inconsistent in that role. Defensively, despite being undersized, he's passable, but the three-point shooting that was supposed to be a big part of his game has kind of faded away, and he's a very inconsistent scorer for sure. I'll give him a C+ just for being an alright contributor every night, even when he has bad shooting nights, and yeah, he's going to bring some defense, so I'll give him a C+ for that. Next up is Gordon Hayward, and this is going to be no surprise. F for the season and F for his whole tenure in Charlotte. He got overpaid to barely play, and when he could play, I don't know if it's the coach or the front office making the call, but the offense sometimes just goes to a screeching halt just to give this guy some ISO possessions that always end in a brick mid-range shot. Defense is lacking as well. His play and his massive contract made it so hard to deal him or attract players to play in Charlotte for the past few years. That signing set the franchise back. So, like I talked about in one of my videos, I was completely against him getting a tribute video. There's nothing to honor him for, and I'm glad that he's off the team. Next is Nick Richards. He was forced into the starting center slot for the majority of the year because of the absence of Mark Williams, and yeah, I like Nick as a backup center, but he just can't be a starter, which, to be fair to Nick, it isn't his fault, but for his grade, he'll get a B. Sometimes he would get torched, but then there were some times when he would hold up well, so it kind of balances out some. Next up, it's Cody Martin. I've been against having Cody Martin on the team from the start, and nothing has changed. In a league that favors offense, he's an offensively challenged player that is not good at anything on that side of the basketball. Whenever he dribbles the ball, the offense comes to a screeching halt, which happened a lot post-trade deadline. Clifford kept on putting the ball in Cody's hands to start the game. With everyone on that new-look Hornets team playing so well, Cody was the clear odd man out. Not even his defense could save him because that's fraudulent as well. Cody is scrappy sometimes, a hustle player sometimes. I believe that defense is the strongest part of his game, but just because that's the strongest aspect of his game, that doesn't mean that he's good at it. I'm not getting tricked by this guy getting in a defensive stance and shuffling his feet. There's been plenty of games when Cody had been torched as a lockdown defender. Not a lockdown defender to me. Not even gonna say not a lockdown defender to me. No, it's objectively true. He's not a lockdown defender. Also, the little perimeter defense that he provides just isn't as impactful as rim protection in today's league. The guy is not good at anything that's valued in the NBA, leaving him no real reason to be on an NBA basketball court. Also, the guy only played 28 games this season. Easy F. Next up is Davis Bertans. Definitely the quietest trade deadline acquisition at the beginning, not getting as much playing time as the others. This really doesn't have to be a long section at all. All Bertans provides is shooting. That's really it. My biggest concern is his shot selection. He can hit threes on the team that no one else can. I like that. But every game, he's always taking 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 shots that are like, you shouldn't have shot that. He shoots a lot of shots early in the shot clock, and he's not even getting his feet set for most of his shots. I want him back because he brings an interesting dynamic to the Hornets offense, but I don't want him to have as many minutes, and I don't want him to have as much of a green light as he had this season. Maybe dial that back some and stop shot hoisting next season. I'm just saying, but yeah, for the season, I'll go with a B+ for Bertans. He shot the Hornets out of some games, but he also won them some games, so I'm not mad at all. Fun player. Next up is Seth Curry, and it's unfortunate that he only got to play 8 games because I really liked his play. The three-point shooting wasn't where I was expecting it to be, especially for a Curry, but he was a nice spark plug off the bench and a scrappy defender. I'll give him a B-, probably would have been an A- or an A if he played more games and carried over some of that production into future games. Next up is Vasilije Micic. The guy was sort of a roller coaster. Amazing start, like the playmaking was always there, and although the scoring was questionable, like the willingness to overpass left a few points, a lot of points on the board. Even though that happened, he was still good and even found his way into the closing lineup. But as film started to come out on this guy, he was dared to shoot and he had some ugly games. But then as the season came to a close, his 3-point shooting came around and it felt like he started to adapt to the NBA game. I'll give him a B-. Good start, good close, but that middle stretch was tough to watch. But to be fair to him, he's not a starting point guard, so I wouldn't mind seeing him on the roster next season and just seeing how he can function in his actual role. He showed a decent amount of promise for sure. Next up is Tre Mann. He's definitely a streaky player for sure. I'm actually surprised that he shot a little over 36% from 3 because it seemed like every game he was just throwing up bricks from 3. He's a fine offensive player, but really, he impressed defensively. Now, when he's being hunted by the Boston Celtics, yeah, of course he's going to look bad. But one-on-one against similar-sized matchups, he holds up really well and can even get some steals. He was fine for this season, so I'll give him an A-. Wouldn't mind seeing him on the team next season, but probably not as a starter. Maybe use him off the bench or package him up in a trade for a starting level shooting guard, because that's the position that I think the Hornets, the Hornets need to address that position in the offseason. Like they have LaMelo, Brandon, hopefully Miles resigns, then hopefully Mark returns to his previous form, get a shooting guard. Next up is Grant Williams, the MVP of these trade deadline acquisitions, so it's pretty obvious that he's getting an A+. He brings a lot of toughness to the team while also being a great player in his own right. Great defender, especially for being undersized, and the threes were falling. Also, he could take it off the dribble and float it up there. Like, he's a way better offensive player than I was expecting. So yeah, Grant gets an A+, and hopefully he's on the roster next season. Next is Mark Williams. I'll make this short. He gets an F. Not only was he barely available, but even when he played, his defense wasn't amazing like it was the season prior. He didn't get better and barely played, so he has to receive an F. Next is Miles Bridges, and he's really tough to assess. Kind of an up and down season for him. Like when he finally got to play, there was a stretch when he was averaging 19 points on 50, 40, 90 shooting, and Melo and Miles were shredding through the Washington Wizards defense, looking like old times. But once LaMelo went down for this December to early January stretch, Miles played badly because his self-creation isn't good, not good enough to be a number 1 option. And with LaMelo out, one of the best playmakers in the league, Miles's buckets got tougher. But then there was this trade deadline season stretch when he went nuclear with those 40-point games. But once the trades got made, he didn't have to go for 40 points anymore, and he was fine just scoring 25 and winning games. But as the roster got depleted, he kind of was an inconsistent player, I've got to say, on both sides of the court. In some games, he was deferring to Miller, while in some games, he was shot hoisting and probably shot them out of a few games, not going to lie, while having not the best defense in some of those games. He scored his 21 points per game for the season, which is a career high, but his efficiency was down. I already explained how that doesn't make Miles a worse player because LaMelo's supposed to be there, getting him easier looks. But one thing that fell off a cliff was his athleticism and finishing at the basket. Just missing a lot of bunnies this season, which I can't blame that all on not having LaMelo, even though I think that if LaMelo was out there, he's definitely getting some easier looks at the basket. But yeah, hopefully Miles's athleticism comes back now that he's going to be in an NBA gym. Also, like I said, the defense is hit or miss. I would like to see him get better at defense, especially since he might be the starting four for next season if he comes back. His fit is questionable because he's an undersized four. I like him at the three, but Brandon Miller plays the three, so I wonder if Brandon would be willing to move down the slot. But yeah, Miles' season wasn't as good as his breakout season, but I like that he played in so many games. Despite the season being quote unquote over, he still put on a show for the fans and rarely missed games and just left it all out on the court. He'll get an A+ grade for his performance this season. His play deserved an A-, maybe even B+ at times, but I respect him for playing in all of those games when like the season was basically over. He didn't play in every single game, but like I said, barely missed games. Iron Man, would love him to re-sign with the Hornets. Next is Brandon Miller. He's going to get an A+ for being so flexible and available. This is a guy that was put into so many different roles this season, like coming off the bench early. Then he was a sidekick to Miles Bridges in that January, February time. Then he was more of a complimentary piece when the new additions came in at the trade deadline, sacrificing his stats, sacrificing those 30-point games for wins. Then in the closing weeks of the season, he was the #1 option and leading the Hornets to decent wins over the Cavs and Magic. Also, 74 games played for the guy. I respect that so much. He wants to be out there on the court. Now, I would like to see his handle get better if he's going to be a legit second option, and I would like to see him be a bit more consistent, follow up big games with another big game, but I can't complain much about Miller. He deserves an A+. Lastly, for LaMelo's grade, he's flat out just going to get an F. He had the 9-game stretch of averaging 32 points, but there was also the beginning of the season and when he came back from injury when he was just a brickhead and cost the Hornets games because of his inefficient shooting. I can even make the case that his atrocious play at the beginning of the season hurt the Hornets more than Miles' 10-game absence. The bad thing about LaMelo getting injured is that this is a guy that needs to be on the court. He needs to play against NBA competition because every time he comes back from an injury, he's always going to take like 7, 8, 9 games to get in rhythm, and the team isn't good enough to hide him going out there and throwing up bricks. I was upset that I didn't see any urgency from LaMelo to get back on the court, even when the trades were made and the new look Hornets won 5 of the last 6 games at a point. I've already gone through this stuff, but the people saying that there's no reason for LaMelo to play because the season was over were completely wrong. First off, his bad play and injuries put the Hornets in that hole to begin with. It's not the team's fault for not holding up without him. It's LaMelo's fault for not being there and not wearing the ankle braces and putting his health at the forefront to benefit the team. Next, when the trades were made, making the playoffs was still very much possible because this was one of the weakest Eastern conferences in NBA history. So that was still on the table and it was a great shot to finally make the playoffs, all wasted because of LaMelo. No guarantee that the East is going to be this weak next season. Also, LaMelo is not an established superstar player. He can still get better, which is another reason for him to play. I saw players this season that even when their team was eliminated from playing contention, they didn't just shut their season down to preserve their bodies for next season. No, they still went out there and played because they know the importance of getting in as much game time as they can against NBA players in NBA games. So being eliminated from playoff contention really isn't an excuse at all to sit. Plus, the Hornets weren't eliminated from playing contention, so it's not an excuse. Also, because of his absence, no one has any idea what this team really is because everyone was playing out of position and taking on roles that they wouldn't have if the Hornets were healthy. This guy, just by not being on the court, has done so much damage to the Hornets, and I'm tired of having to shut down the season every year all because of him. It was a good 9-game stretch, but considering everything else, I can't justify giving LaMelo anything higher than an F. But yeah, those are the player grades. Can't wait to see how or if the Hornets fix this team in the offseason under the new leadership. But yeah, that's it